All right, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh, and this is just another episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week for the week of May 1st. And if you're new to Best and Worst Track of the Week or the podcast in general, it's just a podcast where I like talking about music, nothing too crazy about it. This segment that you're listening to, I take all new entries into the Billboard Hot 100, grade each of them with a letter grade, and then pick one that's the worst, pick one that's the best. That's about it. And yeah, this is going to be for the first set of tracks we have in May. And yeah, year's moving a bit fast, I will say. But hey, what can you do about that? And I will say, in comparison to last week, I thought maybe this batch was, I don't know, it was a change of pace. Last week was the mini Taylor Swift album bomb for her Taylor's version remakes. But I will say last week did have some more variety with 21 Pilots and Kevin Gates and Doja Cat and SZA being on there. But if you didn't listen to last week, if you're interested in some of my thoughts on a lot of those tracks from that Taylor Swift mini album bomb, or just the Taylor Swift Taylor's version of Fearless, check out that episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. It's up as the week of April 24th on whatever you're listening right now to the podcast with. So yeah, this week, honestly, another mini album bomb, this time from the Slime Language 2 album, featuring mainly Young Thug and Gunna, but really it's a compilation album of various featured artists. I think most or not all of them are on the album art, so pretty cool on that. But honestly, this project is one of those that I don't really see having much relevance now that it has pretty much gone and come. It's definitely made its impact this week on the charts, but honestly, I don't really see much of it staying around. Much like other projects that this has happened with in the past, like the Pluto and Little Pluto thing that Lil Uzi Vert and Future did. But nonetheless, yeah, this week mainly features tracks from that mini album bomb, or that album, Slime Language 2. Other artists, though, that we're covering this week, Moneybagg Yo's on here, Maren and Ryan Hurd for some country variety. But yeah, stick around if you're interested in my thoughts on any of this stuff I just mentioned. Alright, so first track this week coming in at 99 off of the Slime Language 2, I don't know what to call this, mixtape, compilation album featuring Young Thug and Gunna, of which the majority of the podcast is from. Yeah, Slatty by Young Thug and Gunna featuring Gotti and Lil Duke. I will say this is probably one of the lower tier tracks on this project. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but just out of the sample size I have from it. First of all, the hook on this track is very reminiscent of that stupid song that Bolby from Jimmy Neutron would sing. The hook sounds almost exactly like that. Young Thug does this typical high-pitched, chirpy flow on here. Other than Young Thug, Yak sounds probably the most interesting. Gunna and Lil Duke just sound too similar and derivative to each other on this track. And I thought at least there was some grit to Yak Gotti's presence. The hook is still stupid, and the track feels very minimal effort, or it feels like it had minimal effort on it, so I give it a C. Next track, Go, featuring Big 30 and Moneybagg Yo at 96. Typically I really do not fuck with Moneybagg Yo, and this Big 30 dude, honestly, he just sounds like Pooh Shiesty. There's an aspect that's still interesting with how the chemistry works between Moneybagg Yo and him on this track. It's a pretty short track, though. Some typical ad-libs at the end of the stanzas. It's honestly one of the better Moneybagg Yo tracks I heard, but it's not saying much. And again, Big 30 just sounds like if there was a family tree of rappers, Pooh Shiesty and Big 30 would be like right next to each other. That's how similar their rapping is, and that's how similar they are stylistically. So yeah, I gave this track a C. Next track, Chasing After You by Ryan Hurd with Maren at 91. Not very knowledgeable about who Ryan Hurd is, other than he's a Nashville country songwriter guy trying to break it onto the Nashville scene as a solo artist. This track is just a very cliche with the typical slow down country track that features a girl and guy. a la like the stuff that Brad Paisley and Carrie Underwood have done in the past, and then Kid Rock and Sheryl Crow. And I'm sure if you go back to the origins of country, this has been happening. I think even Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers have one of these. But anyways, there's a simmering nature to this that I can appreciate how patient it tries to be. But Maren clearly sounds the most captivating on here. Her presence just sticks out in terms of personality. The track can be a bit static and stale by the time we get to that third chorus. It just doesn't climax anywhere. The track does sound pretty overall, so I give it a C+. Next track is off of Slang Language 2 as well at 59. Proud of You featuring Lil Uzi Vert and Young Kayo featuring Young Thug, or by Young Thug. Yeah, nice playful mood on this track from the melodic hook that Uzi comes in with. It's one of the better hooks on this project, I think. A colorful and bright synthy instrumental, a bit covered up by the bass and percussion, but it's not bad. Almost Playboy Cardi-like. It's a light-hearted kind of track. I don't think it takes itself too seriously. The feature by Young Kayo isn't bad as well. He at least blends in the track, and his presence feels organic. His feature is a bit brief though, but overall I thought this was a decent track. I give it a B. Next track, Diamonds Dancing by Young Thug and Gunna, featuring Travis Scott at 46. The auxiliary percussion thrown in on this beat is nice. A bit different than what you'd expect to hear Travis on, I think. There's a bit of like a laid-back vibe to this track as well. The trancy chord progression that structures the track really helps create that. Everyone comes in really quite organically with like a unique style. The doubled lines that are in unison at the end of the track are a bit unnecessary, though, in my opinion, but it's not bad. I give it a B. Next track is Ski by Young Thug and Gunna at 18. Honestly, I expected more out of this track, especially since it was just Young Thug and Gunna. I haven't really listened to many things that Gunna is on, but he knows how to make a decent feature at times, like on Lemonade. I don't know, the bubbly electronic elements on this beat are nice. It gives a nice color to the track. The synth strings that structure the track can be a bit bare and skeletal, though. Just makes the track feel a bit minimal. It's not bad, it's just a bit forgettable. The brief hook that the track builds up to with the yeah, ski, it's a bit uninspired as well. I'd say some of these hooks are just lazily written. So I give this track a C. Next track, Solid by Young Thug and Gunna featuring Drake. I honestly expected more from this track as well. There's a murky color to this track that has like some eerie synths that are presented. A more relaxed nature too at times, with the presence being a bit reserved. It seems like the track really just aims at creating a certain mood, honestly. And the track has an interesting sound with the muddied sub bass being utilized much of the time. But it can be a bit distracting at times with how prominent it is. And honestly, none of these verses are all that memorable. Maybe Drake's being the most. So I give this track a C+. So we're at that time of the show where I present the best and worst track of the week. We always start on the worst track of the week just so we end on a positive note. And seeing that this was, of course, the Slang Language 2 mini album bomb sort of deal. Honestly, the project as a whole, I don't know. I like the variety of artists that come on track to track, but it should be to no surprise that both worst and best track of the week came from this. Paid the Fine is worst track of the week by Young Thug and Gunna featuring Lil Baby and YTB Trench. Honestly, there would be nothing all that bad about this track had they'd left a certain artist off. And unfortunately, that artist is one I really have no knowledge, or I haven't really heard anything else they've been on, and that's YTB Trench. And on this track, he just sounds like a very more annoying version of Little TJ with how nasally he sounds. He's like a babyier version of Little TJ. And he's mainly featured on the hook of this track, and it sounds fucking awful with him on it. It sounds so clunky in comparison to the rest of the other rappers. It's like he doesn't have any self-awareness that he's ruining the track. It's not even quirky like Young Thug is on a lot of things. It literally is just lacking taste. It's kind of disappointing because the production on here was light. There was an ethereal light beat on this. Some huge sub bass cutting through this beat at times. I thought was a bit too much. But yeah, had they just stuck to just keep it simple and left one less artist out, this track maybe could have had a chance. But the decision to put YTB Baby on YTB Trench on much of the track just ruined it. So yeah, worst track of the week goes to that one. Best track was from Came and Saw by Young Thug and Rowdy Rebel at 66. Now Rowdy Rebel, I remember listening to a track that he was featured on the last Pop Smoke album. His feature was a bit odd to me because it sounded like he was coming in through a phone call with how crackly and distorted it was. I don't know really what's the deal with that. But the track overall is decent. It sounds like it's a sort of Drake-like instrumental. And there's a huge contrast in comparison from listening to this and Paid the Fine. Especially when you're going back to YTB, the husk on Rowdy's vocal is great to hear, and it's a nice contrast to Young Thug as well. I dig the spaciness of the bass as it fades in and out as Thug's verse comes in on this track. The space between the snare and the bass hits are great as well. Probably one of the better tracks off of this album if I had to listen to the whole thing. It has a lot of character, and I gave it a best track of the week because of that. Honestly, it didn't really have to present that much to beat out a lot of the other stuff off of Slime Language 2. But yeah, that's just about it this week. If you stuck with me to the end of this episode, thank you so much for listening. My name is Josh. If you're on YouTube, leave a like and subscribe, or just leave a comment, good or bad. And also, if you're listening on a streaming service, subscribe on there too, if you're going about it that way. But thank you once again. Just a quick announcement take care of this YouTube version of the podcast. Since this is condensed, if you're by chance wanting to hear the full version of the podcast, I link always in the comment section the full Spotify episode. There's just a full episode where I kind of just like talk more and like lead up to like the song reviews, where I drop like some announcements of the podcast and kind of like warm up to like what's going on this episode and the tracks that I'm about to review and really what's going on the chart. But yeah, if you're interested in listening to that, go ahead and check out the full episode on the bottom of this video in the comment section. Also, if you want to listen to the music reviewer on your respective streaming service, that's cool too. You can honestly find the main page on anchor.com with the music reviewer profile, or you can just go on really any mainstream listening platform, TuneIn, Overcast, Apple Podcasts. Basically, if it supports podcasts, I'm probably on there. But yeah, announcement over.